It's Monday, the 6th of June. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel. I'm getting a lot of questions about the crash of the Cessna Caravan skydiving aircraft at Oceanside, California over the weekend. The second crash of a skydiving caravan at this location in the last 6 months. This one resulted in a fatality. First, over here on the Aviation Safety Network, this accident occurred on Friday, the 3rd of June. A Cessna 208B Supervan 900 operating for Go Jump Oceanside. That's the operator there at the drop zone at Oceanside. They have two operations, one here at Oceanside and one in Las Vegas, Nevada. But the aircraft was leased from Skydive Spaceland, Houston. The tail number is November 7581 Foxtrot, 1994. Engine power, this one has been modified by STC, and the stock PT6 engine has been replaced by a Honeywell TPE 331 engine. So the PT6 was a free turbine design turboprop engine, and this is a geared Honeywell engine. One fatality out of the two occupants. A Cessna 208B Supervan Honeywell TPE 331 850 horsepower engine, skydive configured airplane was substantially damaged when it crashed in a field about 1/4 mile short of runway 25 of Oceanside Municipal Airport, California. The jump master was fatally injured and the pilot was seriously injured. On February 22nd, 2022, another Cessna 208B Grand Caravan of Go Jump Oceanside, one of their aircraft, crashed about the same location during approach to runway 25, seriously injuring both occupants. This same aircraft, 7581 Foxtrot, did suffer some very minor damage during a runway excursion back in 2016 in Wisconsin, Baldwin Airport, Wisconsin. They attempted a drop. As the weather was deteriorating, they decided to not drop the skydivers, return to the grass field, attempted to land on the relatively short grass field, wet grass, with a plane full load of jumpers, with a stabilized approach and a good touchdown. But when they put on the brakes, they found out that the RCR, the runway condition reading on the grass runway, was virtually nil, and the airplane slid off the grass runway. Here's the ADSB data from last Friday, November 7581 Foxtrot, doing the skydive run here at Oceanside, California, and a fairly conventional skydiving run. Climbing up to about 11,500 feet, slowing down to about 85 or 90 miles an hour for the drop run. Jumpers away over the airport or near the airport, and then exchange that altitude for airspeed and start a rapid descent down, and then it looks like a quick 360 here at about 2,000 feet, just to lose that last 1,000 feet of altitude to get lined up for final, and then came up short. If we look at the data, we've got good speeds in that he's remaining well within maneuvering speed of the aircraft. He's not overspeeding the aircraft in any way. The descent rates are about normal for a skydiving run, climbing at 1,000 feet a minute and then descending at about 3,000 feet per minute initially. But then right here, the last couple of data points, descending 800, 900, and 750 feet per minute, right to within 300 feet of the ground, or 300 feet of GPS altitude, with the airspeed decaying down to 68 knots and 78 knots. So something right here towards the very end indicates to me some kind of a problem with the power plant. The Oceanside Airport is located here south of Los Angeles and north of San Diego, and features a relatively short, about 2,500 foot long runway. And this aircraft ended up here, short of the runway, parallel to the freeway. Though people are paying for a ticket to ride on a skydiving airplane, these skydiving operations are operated under FAR Part 91, General Aviation, through a loophole where they do not need to operate to Part 135 standards. And skydiving is a completely whole different culture in aviation. Anybody that's been involved with a skydiving operation knows this, and this is one of the first jobs I got as a new pilot back when I was building up flying time, flying up Cessna 182 for a skydiving operation. Now here's the NTSB report on the previous accident out there at Oceanside. And it sheds some light on this different kind of flying attitude, which is unfortunately so prevalent in so many skydiving operations. Again, this does not shed light on the current accident. This is the accident that happened back in February. The pilot stated that the passenger, who was also a pilot, had planned to observe the skydiving operation over the course of the day. Earlier in the day, the pilot had conducted 3 flights to drop off skydivers at an altitude of 13,000 feet. On the 4th flight, the aircraft departed runway 25, that's out to the west over the ocean, and made a gradual climb up to altitude. Skydivers departed. The pilot initiated a steep turning descent in excess of 6,400 feet per minute. Remember, on Friday's accident aircraft, he only achieved about 3,000 feet per minute, a more reasonable rate of descent. The pilot stated that he set the power to idle and recalled the torque gauge indicating 0%. When the airplane was on the base leg for the traffic pattern to runway 25 at an altitude of about 4,000 feet, which is very, very high, the pilot attempted to arrest the descent by adding power. The pilot further stated that despite his attempts to add power, his movement of the power lever was unresponsive. The engine thrust did not increase. He moved the propeller speed lever, which also was unresponsive. The pilot presumed the engine had flamed out and attempted to restart it. With the propeller still windmilling, he switched the ignition to continuous and turned the boost pump on. He observed the torque gauge increase from 0 to 20%, but the power lever was still unresponsive. He added full nose-up elevator trim, and the control yoke was full aft against the stop. Even with the full elevator inputs, the airplane could not maintain a level attitude. The airplane collided with terrain in a nose-low attitude about 1,400 feet short of the runway. The pilot did not feather the propeller during flight. That's the only way you're going to get a decent glide out of these things. Single-engine turboprops after an engine failure is to feather that prop. With the prop not feathered, it's windmilling, creating a tremendous amount of drag and a very high rate of descent. And this is something investigators will be looking at closely in this most recent accident. What was the condition of the prop? If there was an engine problem, was the pilot able to feather this propeller? Without feathering it, you're going to come up short of the runway if there's an engine problem. The passenger stated that before the flight, the pilot explained various flight sequences that are done for skydiving operations. The pilot said that he will occasionally use a beta setting in flight as a means to perform a rapid descent. That's not what the book says. We'll take a look at that later. During the accident flight, the pilot told the passenger that he would use beta to descend and race the skydivers to the ground. Again, there's no indication of this in Friday's accident at this time. This is the previous accident. After the skydivers departed, the pilot began a steep descent and retarded the power lever to beta mode. The passenger noted that the fuel gauges indicated empty and a low fuel light was illuminated, both of which he relayed to the pilot. The pilot responded saying, those gauges are inaccurate. Shortly thereafter, while on base leg of the traffic pattern, the pilot stated that he was going to make a right turn without using any rudder. In other words, I think he wanted to slip the aircraft in order to help him lose altitude. The passenger further stated that the pilot initiated a steep right bank followed by a steep left bank. He recalled that the turns were all uncoordinated and the auxiliary fuel pump light was illuminated. The pilot began to move the power and propeller speed levers and then stated that they'd lost the engine. The airplane impacted the terrain in a nose-low attitude. The passenger took several videos of the flight from his cell phone, and the video from the accident flight showed that the fuel gauges were at empty. The RPM was about 65%, and the oil temperature and pressure were in the green arcs. FAA inspectors that responded to the accident said that the fuel tanks remained intact with no apparent perforations. Recovery personnel drained about 20 gallons of fuel from the airplane, all of which was in the right wing. The airplane came to rest in a right wing low attitude. The airplane was recovered for further examination. So he probably unported fuel in uncoordinated flight because the Cessna Caravan has a very low amount of unusable fuel. We'll look at it in the manual here. It's only about 2 or 3 gallons. You should be able to use most all of the fuel in a Cessna Caravan if it's burned evenly and you remain in controlled flight and are not side slipping it, which will help in unporting the fuel, so to speak, from the fuel tanks. You'll get air in the system. So here's some of the photographs from the previous accident back in February. And here's some photographs from this most recent accident last Friday. Again, unable to tell whether the prop was feathered or not, but that short embankment definitely contributed to the injuries on this accident. And in this view, you can see some of the hazards around the Oceanside airport that the pilot was having to negotiate, the trees and power lines in the area while on final. Now looking at a couple of pages from the Cessna Caravan Pilot Operating Handbook. Again, this is for the stock Cessna Caravan with the PT6 free turbine engine. This is going to be all modified by STC in the aircraft that was involved in Friday's accident, which was powered by the Honeywell engine. Beta mode. Beta mode is the engine operational mode in which the propeller blade pitch is controlled by the power lever. The beta mode may be used during ground operations only. Here's some of the speed limitations on the Cessna Caravan. 175 knots red line. Maneuvering speed, don't make full or abrupt control movements above these speeds, varies with weight, but maxes out about 148 knots. Again, the ADSB data from Friday's aircraft looks like that pilot was well within maneuvering speed the entire time. Here we can get a quick look at best glide speeds. This would be a very light aircraft with no skydivers and very little fuel, down to 74 knots indicated airspeed. Engine out. For an engine failure in flight, they want you to get to 95 knots, power lever idle, and then feather that propeller to maximize your glide. For a flame out, engine flame out during flight, if you want to try and get this thing going again, power level idle, ignition switch on. But if your gas generator speed drops below 50%, fuel condition lever cut off. And then there's an air start procedure you can attempt as well. Now on the stock Cessna Caravan with the PT6A, there's a emergency power lever. I don't know if this is true in the aircraft that's STC'd with the Honeywell engine, but in the case of a PT6, if you suspect there's a problem with the fuel control unit and the engine just rolls back to idle RPM, bring the power lever back to idle, and then engage the emergency power lever, maintain 65% NG. The emergency power lever overrides normal fuel control functions and results in the direct operation of the fuel metering valve. Utilize slow and smooth movements of the emergency power lever to avoid engine surges or over-temping or over-torquing the engine. In other words, when you use this, you lose your protections that normally the fuel control unit would automatically take care of. And we'll take a look inside the cockpit and see where this is located here in a minute. Again, this is for the stock Cessna Caravan with the PT6 power. And finally, if you're running out of fuel, ensure that fuel tank selectors are both on. Turn the ignition on, that's continuous ignition on, and the fuel boost pump switch on. At Oshkosh last year, I ran across this wonderful display of the PT6A Pratt & Whitney engine free turbine cutaway view. Now, for the accident that happened on Friday, that aircraft had the Honeywell, or what I call Garrett, direct drive engine. this discussion does not pertain to that aircraft. This discussion pertains to the first accident. That aircraft was powered by a PT-6A, and why you do not want to run a PT-6A in beta mode while in flight. For the Garrett direct drive engine, it's got a system, since it's direct drive and not a free turbine, the Garrett has a NTS or negative torque system, which will drive the propeller to a feathered condition if in the event the propeller attempts to drive the engine, which would happen if you were attempting a beta mode descent. But here's the PT-6A demonstration. Starting at the front of the engine is the gear reduction drive. This gear reduction drive gets the RPM down from about 30,000 RPM off of these turbine blades here down to about 2,000 RPM for the propeller. Here's the fuel control unit, which runs the fuel to the nozzles right here, which dumps it into the canannular burner section right there, and that's where the fuel is burned to make this thing turn. So let's go all the way to the back. Here's the air inlet. It goes through 4 stages of axial flow compression and then into a centrifugal flow compressor. Then through these tubes up here, that air is moved into the burner section where it is lit with the ignition and the fuel injected by the nozzles. And then that high temperature, fast moving fuel air combination is ran across these 3 turbine blades. This first turbine blade right here extracts most of the power from the engine. And this is where, when I say the engine is split in two, this is where the free turbine part of the engine is. This whole section of the engine here, the NG or gas generator section, spins independently of the turbine section, which is there just to drive the propeller. So a full 3/4 of the amount of energy from this fuel mixture is being extracted right here by this first turbine blade and is used simply to drive the compressor section. From there, the fuel air burning mixture goes through these 2 turbine blades, which drives the propeller section. And these 2 little turbine blades here produce the nearly 1,000 shaft horsepower that this engine is capable of. But again, most of the power of this engine is used to drive the compressor section. And so all of this is done through a delicate balance of air pressure throughout this engine. And if you put this engine into beta mode in flight, you disrupt this entire airflow throughout this delicate airflow throughout this entire engine and can easily flame out the engine. The Honeywell TPE 331 engine, what you normally call the Garrett direct drive engines as they used to be known as, which was on the accident aircraft from Friday. That aircraft was STC'd or had a supplemental type certificate to change over to this engine, is a direct drive engine. All 3 of these turbine blades and 2 compressor blades are all mounted on a common shaft all the way through to the propeller gear reduction drive system to the propeller. The main advantage with this engine, and why they would want to STC or change the aircraft to use it perhaps, is because you have a more instantaneous throttle response. You have less spool up time with this engine than you do with the Pratt & Whitney PT6 free turbine engine. But in order to prevent the propeller from driving the engine as in beta mode or in the event of an engine failure, this engine has a negative torque system which will automatically drive the propeller towards a feathered position if in the event the propeller attempts to drive the engine. And this negative torque system is critical in multi-engine aircraft to relieve the drag from a windmilling propeller of one engine during a critical phase of flight, like takeoff, for example. And these engines are also common to our OV-10 Broncos that CAL FIRE uses out here in California. In fact, there he goes right now. Because this pilot survived this accident and the general condition of the wreckage, investigators will quickly be able to figure out what happened here to cause this accident. Thanks so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.